What we're going to do now is we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to start talking about some repair issues. Um, First thing I want to do is I've got a couple of check valves up here I want to go over with you and talk about just a little bit, and maybe show you some helpful household hits that maybe you may not be aware of on them. And then we're going to start tearing apart some backflow preventers. First thing I want to talk about is the Watts 909 check valves. We've all pretty much seen these out in the field. They're a semi-component check. Hey guys, can you keep it down? Hey! Maybe try to keep it down a little bit over there, please. The acoustics in here really suck. So, the 909 check valve is a semi-component check, meaning that you've got your disc and your disc holder and your spring capture and everything is one component, and then your seat is actually a separate component that is either threaded or clipped into the body of the unit. Now, have any of you ever repaired one of these and you put new rubber in it, put a new seat O-ring in it, and you put everything back together and it still have a very slight leak in it, a little drip in it, and you just cannot for the life of you figure out why this thing will not hold water? Okay, you may or you may not be aware that there's actually another O-ring in here that they don't tell you about in the repair instructions. Okay, you know, when you take those 909 check repair rubber kits apart, there's always a couple of extra O-rings in there that there's no place to put it. I want to show you where it goes. Okay, actually, now the spring on this thing is captured. It's captured between this disc holder here, this check holder, this spring holder here, and this cone on the back side of it. And there's actually a C-clip in there that you can remove to remove the loading on the spring. Okay, now, as with most large diameter check valves, you do not want to relieve your spring capture. Okay, because even though it may only be a 2 or a 4 or 7 pound spring, when you start getting in 3, 4, 6, 8, 10-inch springs, you cannot compress those by hand to get the capture back on. Now, on all of these check valves, there's either a way to safely remove the spring loading or a way to access the disc without having to remove the spring loading. And now, on the 909, this is a 4-inch, 3 or 4-inch check valve. To access your disc on this, you have your disc holder, you have your disc, you have your retainer washer, and then you have a large nut. Okay, to access the disc on this thing, you just simply remove the nut. Now that came off pretty easy, right? Because I've already had it off before, obviously. These things can be a real bear to get off out in the field. Now, if you have a vise available, I don't necessarily recommend that you put it in a vise, because if you put this disc holder into a vise and you compress it, you can actually bend it. And if you bend it or warp it or distort this disc holder, then this thing will never seal again. Okay, if this thing is extremely tight, if you can't get it apart just by pulling on it, if you have a large end wrench and a large crescent wrench, lay the check on its side like this, and I don't have a large enough crescent wrench to fit that nut with me, but if you'll put your end wrench on it like this and then take a hammer and shock that nut like that a couple of times, in most cases you can get the nut to break loose. Okay, so they shouldn't be that tight, but they are. So once you get the nut loose, to access the disc, you just simply remove the nut. Then you can remove your retainer plate. We'll take our handy dandy dental pick, and then you can remove the disc out of it. You see, we can actually access the disc without having to relieve the spring loading on this check at all, okay, which is pretty typical on most of the large diameter check valves. Okay? And then, of course, to replace it, just simply go in reverse order. And replace your disc, put your retainer plate back on here, and then put your capture nut back on. And changing the disc is that simple. Now, as far as, typically when we change the disc, or we change the rubber on the 909, we change the disc, or maybe we change the seat O-ring, maybe we don't. Maybe we change the access cover O-ring and we don't. But we always have those 2 or 3 little small O-rings left in that rubber kit that really don't have a place to go. Where they go, they actually go behind this disc holder right here. Okay, because this disc holder will rotate on that stem that's loose on there. Okay, so it's actually an open void that goes all the way through the center of this check. So if you don't have a rubber O-ring in there to seal that, then you are going to have leakage through your check. And to access that O-ring, then you take your slip ring pliers, or your snap ring pliers, and then you just remove the C-clip. Do these on glasses actually. And yeah, they're usually this much of a pain in the ass. Move your C-clip. Then once you remove that, see, then you can remove the entire disc holder off of the check valve. And once you remove that now, there's an O-ring, this one's gone. But there's a groove in this stem right here. And that's where that little O-ring goes. Okay. And that groove on the stem right there, that's where that little O-ring in that repair package goes, is in that groove right there. And what happens, these things never get changed. And when an O-ring never gets changed, eventually what happens to it? They wear out, right? They dry out, they lose all their elasticity, and they'll actually get square. They'll conform to the surfaces of the grooves, and the flat surfaces that they're sealing, they'll actually get square, and it will no longer hold water. And so if you remove that disc holder and replace that little O-ring right in there, you won't have that problem of rebuilding the check valve on 909 and putting it back in there, and it just slowly drift back down and just keep drifting on it. Most of the time, that's where your problem is that little O-ring right there. And then to put it back together, then you just put your O-ring on there, make sure you lubricate it, make sure that the bore is clean inside your disc holder, reinsert that, and then you just simply put your C-clip back on there. Gotta allow it to touch it. Else when you put it on the right side of your pliers. Come on. Back in the groove, and now your check valve is replaced, and now you don't have to worry about that leakage leaking around the stem on it. So, but the repair instructions do not even show you that O-ring, or do they even mention it. But it is a wear part just as much as your disc or your access cover O-ring is. It's in the rubber kit. It's that little rubber O-ring in there that you have no idea where the fuck it goes. That's where it goes. Okay, so it's just a helpful household item on 909. And when we're talking about large check valves, there's one other thing that I do want to mention. When you get into some of these larger checks, the springs in them, they're not stainless steel springs. Okay, they're actually nickel cadmium springs, or just steel, spring steel, but they have this epoxy coating on them. And when you pull these check valves out of a backflow assembly, if they have the epoxy coating on the springs, make sure that you inspect that epoxy coating. Okay, because if there's any degradation, if there's any cuts, nicks, or gouges in this epoxy coating, what can happen is the water will actually get through the epoxy coating and get to the nickel cadmium steel, and then once you get steel wet, in a wet environment, what happens to it? It rots. Okay, so if you have degradation in your spring on a check valve, you need an epoxy coated check, you need to start making arrangements to change the entire check, or at a minimum change the spring, because eventually that steel will rot and wind up with a broken spring in that check valve. So it's just something else to look for. That's why they coat them with epoxy, because they're not stainless steel springs. So, just a couple of helpful household hints from the 909 check valve. Now, as far as seat O-rings go, pretty much across the board. Do you always change your seat O-rings whenever you rebuild a check valve? On the larger diameter checks, or on the assemblies where the check is a separate component, unless you suspect that there's something wrong with the seat or with the seat O-ring, I really don't recommend that you remove those. Because in some cases you can actually cause yourself more headache and more trouble by just trying to replace that seat O-ring than it's worth. Particularly one instance would be like on the 2 inches smaller Wilkins 975 XLs, where the seats are actually threaded into the body, and you have a plastic seat, and it's got the tangs inside of it. You stick the flat piece of metal in there and thread it in and thread it out. What's happened to me on them is the tool that you use for that. Okay, I mean, like with everything else, they tout no special tools required to work on our backflow preventers, but Wilkins and Combraco both actually make a set of tools to remove those seats with. And essentially they're just a flat blade of metal that's got two shoulders on it like this. You slide that inside that seat and you catch those tangs, and you can thread it out and thread it back in. It's a great idea, except for you've got these shoulders right here. When you slide that inside that seat, if you push it all the way till it bottoms out, when you're threading that seat in or out, if you ever rock that tool back and forth, the shoulders on that tool are sharp. They'll actually nick those non-metallic seats. And you put a brand new seat in there, but you'll chip it putting it back in. And now you've destroyed the last good seat that you got. Now, one thing that I did do on mine, if you're using those, is I put an O-ring around this part that slides inside the tangs. So when I put that in there, the rubber would hit the face of that seat instead of the sharp corners of that tool. And that did help considerably, but even with that, I still damaged some seats using those tools. So if you use them, the best thing to do is don't put it in there till it bottoms out. Just put it in far enough to catch the edges of those tangs. And then on those plastic seats as well, screwing them in like that. Because when you get them 3/4 and 1/2 inch, it's so small you can't get your fingers in there. So you have to rely on that tool to line it up. Well, if you don't get it lined up perfectly, the plastic seat, you start threading it in, what happens? You cross thread it, destroy the threads, and now your last good seat is whacked. Okay, so on those seats, if it's a separate component, unless you suspect there's something wrong with the seat, I would not recommend taking them out. And some of them, they're just a pain in the ass. If any of you ever pulled the seat, the relief valve seat, out of a small diameter 909, have you ever pulled one of those out? There's a motherfucker in it. I don't know what they put those in there with at the plant, but those things are tight. I've actually cut on them with a chisel to get them out before because they're tight. So unless you suspect there's something wrong with the seat, I wouldn't worry about taking it apart. However, that being said, if it is a cartridge type check, like this one, where it all comes out in one piece, one complete unit, you'll have a seat O-ring. Okay, this is the O-ring that seals the check to the body of the unit. If you have to take that check out and you rebuild that check, I strongly encourage you to change that seat O-ring. Okay, I have had more trouble with seat O-rings than any other component in backflow prevention assemblies. Okay, we've all been to classes. We've heard manufacturer reps stand up and tell you, the biggest failure on our backflow preventer is debris in the check area. All you have to do is just simply pop it out, clean the debris out of it, put it back together. And they are correct. That is true. But what if that thing has been in service for 7, 8, 10, 12 years and that check valve has never been removed? Now that's not uncommon, right? What happens to this O-ring? It gets flat. Okay, you take that check valve out, you take the seat O-ring off and you look at it, and it'll actually have 4 corners on it, where it's lost all of its elasticity. It's actually conformed to the shape of the area that it's actually sealing. Okay, now when it's in there initially, it'll stay sealed because it was sealed when it was put in there, and it'll maintain that seal. But as soon as you pop it out, it won't reseal because it's smaller. It's lost its life. And so anytime you take a check out to repair it, if you change the disc, always make sure and look at that seat O-ring, because there's good a chance as not that it needs to be changed as well. You know, because early in my career, I changed a lot of discs and I did not fix check valves. They still leaked until I figured out I needed to be changing that seat O-ring. So if it's a cartridge type check, pay particular attention to the seat O-ring. If it's a component type check, unless you suspect that there is a problem with the check or with the seat, do not remove the seat. Now, that being said, let's talk about this check valve right here. Has anybody ever seen one of these? This comes out of a Braco Defender model, what it is, and it's actually a clapper type check. Okay, and it is a cartridge type check. Now the way these things are installed in the backflow preventer, it goes down inside the body and it pops into a machine surface. Now, as far as the retention for the check valves, there's a plate that goes down over the top of the assembly that fits around these 2 shoulders right here, and that's what actually holds the check in place. Okay, so to remove the check valve, what you'll need to do, the first thing is remove this cover nut off the top of the check valve. And when you get it to this point, now you can see this is actually your spring retention is in this top housing right here. Now at this point, you'll remove the bolt from the cover and take the cover off, and you can just take that check and work it back and forth until it pops out of the backflow preventer, and you can remove it in this manner right here. Now again, there's a way to access the disc without having to fight the spring retention on it. And this is your spring retention right here. Okay, so to access your disc on this Defender type check, take your channel locks or a large end wrench, and you'll remove this cap nut. Once you remove this, now see there's your entire spring assembly is captured right there. We have not relieved the spring tension at all. It's still contained within this subcomponent right here. Once we get this out, now the check valve is free to open. And again, this is a clapper type check that opens in an up orientation like this. This is what it sits in the backflow preventer. So once we get it in this condition, to access the disc, all we have to do is remove these 3 bolts that hold the retainer plate on. 7/16 CEU thread, CEU bolt. Once you remove the 3 bolts, now you can remove your retainer plate, and then you can remove your disc. Now, one thing I do want to show you on this check valve, you notice there's grooves on the back side of this disc as
Hold
well.
with something white I can't see against your shirt. Good.
You notice there's grooves in the back of this check valve here. Let's see that. Okay. And what causes those grooves is if you look on the back of the disc holder, there's actually additional sealing surfaces back here. Anybody know why those are there? Typically you see these more on poppet type checks. Yeah, has anybody ever taken a poppet type check apart and one side of that disc be sucked up out of the side of the disc holder? Almost like if somebody tried to peel it out of there. Have you ever run across that on a check valve? It happens. What do you think causes that disc to peel out of there like that? It's actually a vacuum is what causes that. Because when you think about a poppet type check, you got the face of the check valve, the flow of water hits that check, and then the force of the energy created by the flowing water is what pushes the check valve open. So the water hits the face of it, pushes it open, when it separates, flows around the check valve, and then it comes back together and flows downstream. Right where that water is actually hitting the face of that poppet, it actually creates a low pressure area right there. And so if you hit that with enough force, with a high enough velocity, you'll create enough of a low pressure area on the face of that check valve that will literally suck that disc out of that holder. So when you find those poppet type checks that you got the disc, it's like somebody's trying to pull it out, most likely that's what happened. It's had been subjected to some high flows, and it's actually trying to suck that disc out of it. Okay, so to combat that, what the manufacturers have done in a lot of these checks is they'll actually put these additional sealing surfaces in the back side of the disc holder, so that when you put your disc in there and you press it with the retainer plate and the bolts, these seat areas, if you will, actually bite into the back of that disc. And that's the reason they put them in there, because once that bites in, it's harder for it to suck that disc out of there, because it's actually got something biting into it rather than just a compression type fitting. That's what you see these in the back of the disc holder. That's why they're there. They're to prevent that disc from getting sucked out due to a low pressure area. Now, and then obviously to rebuild the disc, you just go in reverse order. Put your disc back in the disc holder. Place your retainer plate. Let me see my phone. Put your bolts back in. And tighten them back down. I'll spray the paint and once you tighten them back down. Once you get that back together, now one other thing to inspect on these is you have this roller on the back side, and this actually rolls against the spring retention. So when the check opens, it actually pushes the spring assembly up and compresses that spring. That's what provides your spring loading. Make sure that it's not broken or cracked. Make sure the pin goes all the way through, and that the pin holders on either side of it are not damaged. Because if these are broke, then it's not going to want to push that spring up, and it could prevent it from putting the appropriate loading on your check. So your check may or may not work. Make sure you want to inspect that before you put it back together. When you get this back together, just take your spring assembly, you thread that back into the body of the unit, and you need to suck it all the way down until it's tight. Okay. Once you get it bottomed out, you notice the shoulder of this cap screw does not come in contact with that plastic. That's the way it's supposed to be. That's what it should look when you get it put back together. At this point, you just reinsert this back into the check valve. You'll need to put a bar or something on the back side of this to push it back into the seating area. You can put your plate back on, replace your bolts, and then put your cap nut back on. And that's all there is to repairing these check valves. And again, you know, there's always a way to either safely relieve that spring tension, or a way to access that disc without having to relieve that spring tension. I mean, that's kind of the whole point, right? You say they're supposed to be inline repairable. Well, if I'm having to fight that spring, I have to have spring compressors and all this shit to deal with the springs. They're not really inline repairable. And so the manufacturers have, they've already thought about all this for us. Okay, so then once you get that in there now, when that check valve opens, the roller compresses the spring and provides the loading for the check valve to open and close. Okay? All right? Just a couple of check valves. The O-ring on the 909, most people don't know about that O-ring. So I wanted to show you that. And then you don't see a lot of those defender checks on here. But when you do see them, you do need to know how to take them apart. Let's take a little 5-minute break. We gotta get something set up.